Hey, the Daliba here. Today's video is on a very interesting unit. Coming next to HSAR is another break character, one that changes its identity quite significantly and elevates it to nearly its original heights even in today's meta. I'll go through the abilities of the Dahlia, or Constance, review her Eidolons, and then give you guys her best builds and Lycones. After that, it's on to pool value and teams where I'll explain her synergy with each of the 3 big break DPS and a little extra. Like and subscribe for more character guides, let me know if you're pulling, and let's begin. The Dahlia is a Fire Nihility unit and our 4th already of this combo, whilst being a Nihility unit that doesn't even need effect hit rate. Anyways, when leveling her up, you'll only want to focus on her talent and ultimate, as her skills and basics can be completely ignored since they only scale her attack multipliers. But let's start her kit review with her talent. When entering combat, the Dahlia gains some energy for a first turn ult, but more importantly, she will designate herself and an ally as dance partners. This ally will either be the teammate that triggered combat, or the ally with the highest break effect. When a dance partner attacks a weakness broken target, the toughness will be converted into a decent super break multiplier of 60%. So both the ally she designates as well as herself will get this multiplier. What also happens is that when said other dance partner attacks an enemy, the Dahlia will launch a bounce attack follow-up onto random enemies, converting its toughness reduction to a much higher super break multiplier in order to compensate for its lower toughness reduction. This follow-up can only trigger once per turn, so having Dahlia act in between her dance partner actions is optimal for maximum follow-up counts. But now for the real power of her kit. She will deploy a 3-turn long zone that decreases its duration at the start of her own turns, and then deal damage to 3 enemies. This zone isn't your ordinary zone though. Not only do we get 50% weakness break efficiency for the whole team, just like Raw and Mei, but instead of useless damage percent for break teams, we instead get a mechanic warping buff. Toughness reduction taken by enemy targets whilst not weakness broken can now be converted into super break damage. That is insane. With toughness inflation on the rise paired with HP inflation, Break really suffered more than most characters. They had to break a bar that kept getting bigger to deal damage just like anyone else. And yes, it is their gimmick, but the balancing was done poorly, which meant they got left behind. So now, every Super Break instance you have in your team will activate on every attack, regardless of if the enemy is weakness broken or not. I mean, even toughness locked enemies will receive damage, which used to be the Break archetype's biggest counter. Now, this mechanic does make Break just feel like another version of Crit, and it does mean Break needs the Dahlia to truly pop off again, but at least they're back in some way. But I cannot understate the power of this. When changing my old Firefly simulation from back on her release, and simply adding the fact that the team can super break whenever, not even adding the rest of the Dahlia's kit like the break efficiency, the damage gain was nearly 40%. And that's still not the end of her kit. Her ultimate inflicts wilt onto all enemies for 4 whole turns whilst also dealing damage. The wilt state applies an 18% def reduction effect on top of also applying the weakness of all the dance partners to enemy targets. Seeing as the Dahlia is fire, that means fire weakness is applied to all enemies upon ulting, as well as whatever element the dance partner has. So AoE physical and fire with boot help, or imaginary and fire with wrapper. Even though Firefly is fire and has her own implant, this AoE implant is still very useful compared to her single target application every enhanced skill. And her implanting fire on ult means anyone can use the Forge Planar set by the way, but please do not farm this if you have a set already as it is a minimal upgrade over Talia and can technically have downtime especially in pure fiction. Finally, her technique applies her zone for free at the start of combat so you can get super breaking instantly alongside a little damage. But her kit is not complete without traces. Dahlia's A2 grants a massive break effect buff to all allies, scaling on 24% of her own plus a flat 50%. However, this only lasts 1 turn and can only be regained once the Dahlia receives healing or shielding from a teammate. Now, do not make the mistake of thinking she therefore needs a sustain. Finan also has a trace like this. It just helps balance the power of sustain teams with sustainless a little. Stainless, of course, is still going to be stronger. Next up, her A4 recovers 1 SP every 2 talent follow-up attacks, letting her help team SP economy by a decent amount when paired with the fact that the Dahlia can basic pretty often if necessary. And finally, her A6. When an ally adds weakness to an enemy target, which can also include Dahlia herself, they will get a 30% speed buff for 2 turns. Firefly can apply 1 every turn in her combustion state for a permanent buff. Now, if an ally fire character implants a weakness instead, 2 things happen. First, every target that had a weakness implanted onto them also receives an additional 20 fixed fire toughness reduction on top. Secondly, the implanter regenerates 10% of their max energy, but this is not per enemy, and the effect is capped at half of the wearer's max energy. Again, this works on the Dahlia, meaning her ult gives herself a minimum of 18 energy back. So this is mostly designed for Firefly, and I wanted to mention that specifically because some units do have very niche traces like this, and it has never meant that they are only for said one character. As we'll talk about later, Dahlia is insane for every break DPS, and this trace is an extra big bonus to Firefly, as well as a decent bonus to some characters, but that doesn't delete the rest of her kit. So let's finish up her kit with an Eidolon review. E1 allows the 60% super break multiplier from her talent to work on every ally now, but it does not mean that they're dance partners as well, and then the dance partners get an additional 40% multiplier. It's not insane, especially with Fugue and Harmony MC in the team, but it's more damage. But additionally, a very interesting effect occurs, where after a dance partner uses an attack, 25% of the enemy's max toughness will be dealt up to a very high and impossible cap of 300 points. It can only trigger once per enemy target, but will reset if the enemy target receives a killing blow, so for multi-phase bosses. Now, she gives break efficiency, does a lot of toughness herself, and also adds fixed toughness in some cases, so this E1's toughness reduction is nice and will scale into the future, but is only properly noticeable in Apocalyptic Shadow bosses. E2 then applies a permanent 20% res reduction to all enemies when the Dali is present. It's some decent amp, especially since Ronmei will be leaving a lot of these new break teams, but it's a whole load of pulls. Then, when any enemy enters the field, they'll immediately be inflicted with Wilt, you get 18% def reduction onto them, as well as both dance partner weaknesses, very strong for pure fiction. E4 increases Dali's damage on follow-ups by increasing the hit count by 5, and then gives a little more team damage amplification. And finally, E6 grants dance partners a 150% break effect buff, but then every talent follow-up now advances all dance partners by 20%. So you get nearly a dance whenever the allied dance partner takes a new turn and attacks, provided the Dahlia is fast enough. Here are my Eidolon simulations for a Firefly composition. I would not say that E1 calculations can ever be accurate because of how it works and how variable it can actually be. In practice, the E1's effects can be very small and not close to this number in damage per AV increase. So I'd recommend sticking to E0 where she is already a formidable unit for break, and instead, if looking to vertically invest, to maybe consider her light cone that we'll see up next. So speaking of that light cone, let's check it out. The wearer first receives a 60% break effect buff. Then it will increase the break damage of the wearer and the teammate that triggered combat by a whopping 32%. Now remember, this is break damage, aka the super undiluted and rare multiplier, only present in Fugue's E4 and the new Battle Pass Harmony Cone. In most scenarios, this is just a 1.32 times increase to your main break carry's damage, aka most of your damage, alongside also multiplying the Dahlia's break damage by 1.32. Oh, and we also get some SP every ultimate now, nice quality of life but unnecessary. I prefer this cone over her Eidolon one because of how generalist it is and how it will just work permanently. The only times I'd say it isn't crazy is if you have Fugue Sig free to use on her, or Cypher Signature free, and those are also limited light cones. Two important things to note though is that first, both of these cones would require an E-Heat Shard chest, which isn't really a problem but can hurt Sustainer survivability. And secondly, def reduction is nice and all, but Break's vertical investment is all about def, ignore, and shred, and so this 24% def reduction might go over the cap and actually bring little benefit. But yeah, E1 can come clutch in AS and can be more useful for Boothill and Rapper over Firefly, but in practice I prefer the S1, not to mention is much cheaper on average. If you don't want to pull the S1 or cannot, then again, Fugue's Light Cone or Cypher's Light Cone are perfectly good options provided you're not overcapping on Def Shred in Cypher's case. Likewise, Resolution works in the same position but has the same problems and has wonky uptime at moments. Rather than going Resolution, you could instead use the new Nihility Battle Pass Light Cone for a longer and maybe not overcapping debuff, but also the classic tutorial. Ult spamming on her is just free toughness reduction as well as more implant frequency for cases like Pure Fiction. For the rest of her build, let's first discuss relics. It's not too difficult. As a break character, she can initially go for the Iron Cavalry relic set, but the Thief set works for less damage but some extra energy if necessary. Ideally, you are breaking with your main break carry though. And instead of just saying you can go win set, I'll explain some nice parts of it. Sometimes you want to act before your main DPS to let them break both toughness bars in the example of Boothill with Fugue, or sometimes you might need her to act before your DPS so that they can activate her follow-up in case of super fast break carries. Whatever the reason, this set isn't recommended for most, but I will mention that it's viable. Her plain ornaments can be the classic Talia or Forge sets for pure break effect stat increases, Forge naturally being a little better. But Von Whack can be used if needing to get ahead of your teammates for whatever reasons, but also can be used for high action counts in the first wave cycle 0. For main stats, you want a defensive chest, but this can also be EHR in the case of some light cones, then speed boots, a defensive orb, and then energy or break rope. Break rope is more damage and a slightly bigger team-wide buff from her A2, but energy rope sets up more consistent ult rotations. More ults is more toughness damage, but also better ult application for both theft reduction and weakness implant, which can be especially nice in pure fiction. For stat goals, you can just aim for a whole bunch of break effect and speed, as well as defensive stats. For some examples, a break effect goal can be from 150 to 200 to even higher when considering her signature. Remember, Forge activates in combat, Harmony MC buffs a ton, and then there's other bonuses like Watchmaker, so I wouldn't sweat too much over it. For speed, you can aim for the usual 160 when you don't have any optimization goals, but really just aim for a bunch on her. Remember, she grants herself her speed buff upon ulting, so you could aim for 172 to hit the 200 speed mark, but you won't necessarily have it up permanently, and it won't be up from the start anyway for the first cycle wave 0. Anyways, with her kit and builds done, what do I think of the Dahlia? Well, I think she is like the Kafka of Break and necessary for it to thrive in this new environment. She is undoubtedly super strong for the archetype because she fixes so many problems whilst also just buffing the damage up on top a ton. She is kind of like how you could pull High Sealans to bring back Kafka and Black Swan. You can pull her to bring back your investment into Break, like if you pulled a Firefly, a Fugue, a Linkshot, or even more like their Eidolons. Kind of also like how Cyrene lets your investments in most Chrysosairs carry on and get stronger, even if they were already doing just fine clearing. Yes, I find it annoying that the characters aren't just balanced better or buffed more frequently, but there is now a way to bring back some of your favorite units. So instead of pulling for a brand new team of Castris, Avenite, Cyrene, Hyacinth, you could just bring back your Break team with just Dahlia. Sure, it won't be the same high power level, but the cost difference at a baseline is large, and they will clear perfectly fine. If you never invested into Break though, then pulling for Dahlia, then Fugue, then the Break carry themselves wouldn't be a strategic choice if considering meta value. And on that same note, if you invested into 2 great teams to replace your old Penacony ones, pulling the Dahlia will make your old team almost like a brand new one without having to pull more units on top. Sure, but that won't always be useful. I can see it for anomaly arbitration, but I do not like pulling for that mode, and otherwise they'd just be there to provide an alternative team if needed, which isn't bad for one character pull, but also remember 4.0 is coming. So again, if you want to revive the old Break team, if you love them, or you need a team and have invested into Break in the past, well, Dahlia is an awesome pull in that case, with Firefly specifically getting the biggest buff, but Buto and Rappa still receiving an upgrade. If you're scared of Break falling off, which I understand, and have moved on to other things, you can safely skip. And if you don't care for Break, well, the Dahlia will be upset at you, but you can hide behind Acheron and safely skip. Her S1 is a noticeable upgrade and you will feel a bunch weaker without it, but at least for Firefly, her power at E0 S0 over Ron May is completely insane. And for Boothill and Rappa, she is still their best support. Ron May came out 2 years ago, so it's surprising that she even lasted this long, and she will still be useful for Break and is still used elsewhere. Regardless, in top Break teams, she is being replaced by the Dahlia, and let's see why. Ron May offers break efficiency, res pen, some delays, speed, a tiny bit of break effect, and some weak break damage procs. If you want to counter E1, that's some def reduction too. The Dahlia, on the other hand, offers the same break efficiency, a super break multiplier, a much large break effect buff in sustained teams, and speed to weakness implanters. At a glance, you'd think Ron May just mogs her, no? But then come 2 important factors. The ability to super break whenever not only destroys Ron May in damage potential, but it is also just an incalculable level of quality of life. No more do you have to bother with breaking an enemy just to finish off like 20% of their remaining HP. You super break and kill them without all that. All that time spent to break an enemy's toughness, it's just a bonus, not a requirement now. The other major factor though is that Ron May does a basic here and there, but the Dahlia has toughness on her skill, her follow-ups, her ults, and does fixed toughness damage on top in some cases. Not only does that make her personal damage contribution so much higher than Ron May's, but it also helps getting 2 toughness breakpoints even easier. Of course, you can still run Ron May with the Dahlia since they both still synergize with Break, but the core is rather Fugue Dahlia or Harmony MC Dahlia, all 3 of these ideally if you are fancy enough. In Apocalyptic Shadow, I find Ron May's break efficiency to still be useful, and she helps survivability in any case, so she's still cool. But let's talk about her synergies, because her power doesn't end there. Firefly specifically has a trace for her, which creates a semi-new setup useful for zero cycling, but also just useful in general. She could do this before the Dahlia, but it wasn't consistent, where she specifically hits the speed breakpoint so that she is acting barely after the end of the combustion state and can thus immediately re-enter. Before, you need to luck out with the quid pro quo Gallagher and other sources of energy, but now we have a free 50% max energy on our side. So instead of getting 5 turns in the combustion state, we get 4, do an unenhanced skill, ult, and then do our 5th turn. It's a little extra damage and toughness, and could only hurt something like the Watchmaker buff. So we can hit this by going for 178.4 speed on Firefly, or 162.4 provided we use 1 Dance S5 or Fugue E2 activation. For Zero Cycle specifically on Wave 2, this will also nicely land us that extra action before the cycle ends. Note that too much advance or speed will make you act again in the combustion state, and thus you'll exit at a weird moment and have a bigger ult downtime on Firefly. But regardless of if you do this new setup or not, the buffs she gives, especially when Firefly has the biggest focus on Super Break in the game, are immense. Must-pull for Firefly lovers that want to upgrade her. Now, Buto still appreciates the occasional speed from the A6, and with Fugue on board, he generates a ton of energy for speed consistency anyway. Her kit is still amazing for him without the extra Firefly synergy though. Permanent Super Break means he can be put into a full Super Break core now and just spam out Super Breaks whilst waiting for those meaty breaks and break procs that come once the toughness is down. She also helps his team break bars quite nicely too, whether it be with break efficiency or her own toughness reduction. And her having an extra implant on hand, especially in AoE, is a big quality of life benefit. And Rapper is a super break and break mix, so again, she appreciates the buffs to her super break power, but also the help in breaking for her talent. She's also the only one that can truly make use of the AoE implant among the 3 traditional break DPS. She also has no way of implanting in her kit and instead relies on toughness ignoring, but that comes at the cost of cutting her toughness reduction, which this new implant would prevent. For other units that can use her, well, any alternative Super Break DPS can use her, though to a lesser degree than the 3 main Break trio. These are characters like Break Shui Yi, Break Su Shang, Break Luca, or Break Silverwolf thanks to her implants and high team-wide damage amplification that all works with break-based damage. But this can also be Lingsha, or even Gallagher for extra silly fun, who can run 3 break supports since they act as both the sustain and the DPS, even if it's the whole team doing the damage in this archetype. Break Himiko could make a comeback too if you like, but ideally you have Fugue as well to let her spam follow-ups. With Fugue, the Dahlia, and Himiko, you're shredding AoE toughness bars like butter. And finally, Anaxa as a break carry gets a nice 30% permanent buff for himself, thanks to the Dahlia's A6, but I don't like it. It feels weak. Anyways, let me know what you think of the Dahlia and whether you're pulling. Thanks to my amazing YouTube members, thanks for watching, and have a goba day.